We begin. Okay, so before we begin our presentation, I want to acknowledge the traditional territories of the Tawasin and Musqueam First Nations and all the Hunkaminam speaking people who have been stewards of this land since time immemorial. I'd also like to offer my respects to the elders who've come before us and the elders and First Nation people who are with us today. So in today's meeting, we're going to talk a little bit about Rotary, polio, how Rotary has been involved in initiatives that are focused on the eradication of polio and many other things as well. So our two guest speakers today are Chris Offer and Gabor Gastoni. I think I got it. And so a little bit about them. Gabor is the Rotary District 5040 Polio Plus Committee Chair. Not only is he an award-winning professional photographer and author, Gabor is also a polio survivor who has taken an interest in working with children who have recently contracted polio. A member of the Rotary Club of New Westminster, he chaired at Lower Mainland's 2016 Polio Walk, and he is now working with a global grant to provide physiotherapy services for children with polio at two Ethiopian rehabilitation hospitals. And Chris is the vice chair of the Rotary Peace Centers Committee. He is a Rotary Positive Peace Activator and IEP, which is the Institute of Economics and Peace ambassador. He's previously served a 3-year term as a chair of the Rotary Peace Major Gifts Initiative Committee, and he has volunteered with Rotary in the Philippines, Russia, China, Laos, and India. In 2016, he was part of a team including WHO, CDC, and the Gates Foundation, evaluating the polio surveillance initiative in Nigeria. He served on similar polio surveillance teams in South Sudan and Sudan. And with that said, I'm going to mute myself and I'll hand it over to you guys.
Okay, I'll just bring up some slides. Oops, that's not what I want. Share screen. Okay, is that working?
Beautiful, Chris.
Good. Okay, we're a very small group, so please interrupt if Gabby or I say something. We sometimes fall into some Rotary jargon and buzzwords. If we do that, interrupt us and ask us what we're talking about, or if there's any questions you need, please go ahead. And so polio goes back, actually, there's in the Egyptian pyramids, there's a person with an atrophied leg and a crutch that is suspected to be polio. So 4,000 or 5,000 years, the virus has been circulating. That picture there of the woman getting that is actually in Delta, 1959. It's a polio vaccination campaign. I clipped that from the Delta Optimus archives. So that was the campaign. And those are iron lungs, something we don't see in the world anymore, but were common for many years and still used in a very tiny few places. Polio causes your muscles to collapse, including sometimes the lung muscles, and people can't breathe. And these were a vacuum pump system that forced the lungs to operate. And there was a quarantine notice. And you can see if you think about COVID, when we're talking about polio, some of the things that went on with polio, think of COVID and you'll see the same. That's a quarantine notice that if polio was in a home, a notice was slapped on the home and you couldn't get it. And I grew up with one of those notices on the door of our home in Richmond, been very close to Ladner. My sister got polio. She was lucky. She never ended up in an iron lung. She did have some loss of muscle in one leg, but our neighbors were petrified of us. I can remember as a child, our neighbors screaming at me to get off the road and get into our own yard. Because people were petrified of us. They're afraid of us, just as we're afraid of today of people with COVID. Any Anything to add to that, Gabby?
No, gee, that's a very moving photograph and of the people in iron lungs. And I guess this was in the 50s, Chris, I would presume.
Yes. You
Yeah,
wanted to, when did you get polio, Gabby?
actually, I got polio very late in life in 1960. We had actually just come from Hungary as immigrants to Canada, and I was only like 3 years old. And there was actually an epidemic in British Columbia the same year. There was about 60 young people that got polio. And actually later on, speaking of these iron lungs, there was a hospital in Vancouver, Pearson Hospital, which had a polio ward where people had such severe polio they couldn't actually look after themselves. And as a student at university, I actually went and volunteered at Pearson. And there were several people still in iron lungs, as I remember. But this was quite a number of years ago. And uh, it's they did survive quite a while, but devastating illness. And you can imagine every one of these people were paralyzed from their neck down and totally depended on that machine for their breathing. So yeah, so that's got a little bit of information on that, but it's an incredible photograph you brought up here, Chris, for sure.
Well, once again, if you think about COVID, now it's not an iron lung, but it's respirators. People, the COVID virus, different virus, spread in a different way. Polio spread through feces, passes through the body, and usually, that's how it spread. It's not coughed out. So a different way it spread. But just as people today aren't using iron lungs, but they're using respirators in hospitals in Delta and Vancouver to live. Rotary started this in the early 1980s, and we built a big partnership of a coalition of groups that are working on this to eradicate polio. We're done incredible. Excuse me. As you can see, we've gone from 1,000 cases a day. That's 1,000 children and young adults being paralyzed, struck down, dying every single day to this year, one case in Afghanistan and one case in Pakistan. That's being verified by some environmental sampling. So we're just on the threshold of a total eradication of a disease. Only one other disease has been eradicated, and that's smallpox. 1979, the last case of smallpox, and it was an easier case to eradicate because anybody, all of us on this call, could diagnose a case of smallpox. That it was so visually, the pox marks, the face, you could identify smallpox. So it's quite, and many of us, myself included, how smallpox vaccine wasn't injected into you, it broke the skin. And many of us have a scar on our arms from the type of injection that was given in smallpox and eradicated smallpox. They're quite remarkable. Gabby, what's you have one leg shorter because of polio or loss of some muscle?
Yeah. I just wanted to add too that Chris is right. There were only 2 cases in 2021. And in August, Africa was declared polio free.
Yeah.
Which is quite a major event for Africa and for Rotary in general. So, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
What's your handicap from polio?
Well, I basically walk with 2 leg braces. It's been a challenge all my life. I was actually very involved in wheelchair basketball for many years, coaching and playing, and also in wheelchair fencing. I represented Canada at the Olympics in 1980, 78 as a fencer. It was quite exciting. And it's it's like anything, a disability is a challenge. And, you know, we all have our challenges. I mean, we had a challenge coming to Canada, you know, from another country. And that was a huge challenge. And so polio was another one. And, you know, human beings tend to gain energy as challenges are put in front of them and so on. So as Canadians, you know, we're mostly immigrants here in Canada, and we're slowly overcoming these challenges and moving forward. So, yeah.
Now, these pictures I took in Nigeria and Sudan, and you'll see the very same in much of India. These are hand cycles. These are polio survivors, and they bicycle with their hands. Parts of the world, they may be confined to their homes for 2 or 3 months during the rainy season. They can't get their hand cycles through the muddy streets during the rainy season. But hand cycles are something you'll see all over. And Rotary, many Rotary clubs have built or supplied hand cycles to polio survivors in many countries. They're also built locally out of spare parts, all old bicycles in Africa, bicycles in much of South Asia, never disappear. They're just repurposed over and over again, and the parts survive. I love the bottom picture there, the guy taking his little girl out for a ride on his hand cycle. So it's
That's really nice.
yeah.
Chris, I have one myself, but unfortunately it's kind of laying fallow in my carport. I need to get the energy. I used to be quite an avid hand cycler, and but I've got to get back into it, I must say.
Yeah, it's something we, you know, some people use for sport here, but and there in much of the world, polio survivors and other people with other disabilities, it's their means to get around. Stop. While I was in Nigeria, I was a Rotary representative with World Health Organization. This was when the last 4 cases of polio were suddenly identified. Nigeria hadn't had any polio for 2 years, and suddenly there were some cases. This is the Emergency Operations Center. All the organizations, I took this photograph, including the Nigerian military were there. They were literally flying vaccine in helicopters. These were in some of the areas where there's significant terrorism and conflict. There was over 1 million internal refugees that were living in camps in up in the Lakes District of Nigeria, and but all these agencies, including Rotary, responding very quickly. And it, as Gabby said, Africa, the continent of Africa, was eventually polio free. Similar project I did in Sudan. This is up near the Eritrean border in Sudan. The woman on my right is actually an American of Egyptian descent, a doctor, epidemiologist I was working with there, and some of the tribal leaders. You don't do anything without having tea and making sure that you've got permission to go in the area. We weren't actually giving vaccine. We were recording, looking at the records for children with paralysis and tracking that they were giving, tracking cases correctly, looking for polio cases correctly. And for a dysfunctional country, they were doing quite well. This is interesting. That's actually a Rotary poster in Arabic that between the two of us. This was an alternative medicine person, that Islamic medicine person, but he also advocated for vaccine. He wasn't opposed, and part of them visiting the alternative medicine people was to ensure not just the Western medicine, the regular doctors, but the alternative medicine people, to ensure that they weren't against the vaccine, that we weren't going to interrupt their type of medicine. They could continue with the medicine they were doing, the medical advice they were giving, but we were very pleased to see a Rotary poster there advocating for vaccines. Just a quick as I keep saying, the comparison to COVID is quite remarkable. And we've learned from polio. This is how Rotary, in many ways, over many years, has contributed to controlling COVID indirectly and directly in Canada, in Delta, and around the world. These are the things we've learned over 35 years of working on polio, and the same things are being used today. The contact tracing we hear so much about is the same that is being used for polio. When a polio case shows up, people go into the community, the village, and track how many, the children, who are they playing with, what school did they go to, and try to vaccinate the children. The quick response teams that we've seen in British Columbia are something that is used. Sometimes they fly from different countries to control outbreaks of polio. Environmental testing, I'll come back to that in a minute. Communications that Dr. Bonnie Henry has done so incredibly well in British Columbia is absolutely critical to controlling polio, getting the message out, telling people. And these are in communities where television may not exist. There may be a radio in the local village. They may go into the village to listen to a cricket game or a football match, and trying to get a polio message at the same time when they're crowding around, listening to a radio that is maybe even solar powered or crank powered, and of course getting the vaccines out, getting the vaccines in. And the polio vaccine has changed many times over the 50 years. It's been developed and changed and refined and modernized many times. So many comparisons between polio and COVID, and many of the lessons we've learned from polio are being applied, and they're also applied to measles, yellow fever, dengue fever, and many other diseases in the world to control them. As I mentioned, environmental testing. This picture was from northern Nigeria in Kano State, and they're scooping out sewage, open sewage, and they scoop out sewage, and the polio shows up in it. And we've actually used this in British Columbia for COVID. Doesn't work so well in big urban areas like the Delta or Vancouver, where all the sewage goes to a central disposal sewage plant. But in smaller communities in British Columbia, if they find COVID in the sewage, they know it's in the community, even though cases may not be showing up. So environmental testing, scooping up sewage in small towns in British Columbia is going on literally today. Maybe a post-school job you could look forward to is scooping up sewage and testing it. Not my idea of a good job, but remarkably people are doing it, and it works, and it's going on. And the two cases that we said, one in Afghanistan and one in Pakistan, have been verified by environmental tests. There's negative tests. There's no polio showing up in the environmental tests in Pakistan, and the problem areas are in Afghanistan and the areas controlled by the Taliban that people can't get into, and some of the tribal areas in Pakistan, which are difficult for the health workers and the military to get into. There's some concern there, but generally it looks very positive. I
might add one more thing.
Go ahead.
Briefly, is the incredible network of immunization for polio developed by Rotary and the World Health Organization around the world. It is also being employed to administer the COVID vaccine. So because they have access to the population and the technology and the techniques for distributing vaccines. So it's amazing that Rotary is also involved with COVID in a very significant manner throughout the world. So.
Not to imply it's all very rudimentary. These are cell phones being paired. This was in Kano. I took these pictures in Kano State in northern Nigeria. They're getting ready for a polio vaccination campaign. And what they use with the cell phones is the GPS. Every time they give a polio vaccine, they click on an app, and that records the GPS location, the age of the child, and then a vaccine. And they can do geo mapping and track track which communities are being vaccinated and which aren't. Many of these areas in rural parts of the world, there is very limited maps, very limited data. Census data is not very good. So doing that, this was just, I went when I was flying in South Sudan, we were using there was no commercial airlines in South Sudan at the time. I doubt if there is now because the civil war was going on. This is a World Food Program aircraft, and we could hitch a ride if there was room on these to fly into various parts of South Sudan into that. And then generally the United Nations aircraft and United Nations vehicles are relatively safe. They don't shoot at them. You're pretty safe. We went through a number of military and checkpoints in UN vehicles, and felt relatively safe. National Immunization Days. This is literally when every child under 5 in the entire country is vaccinated. These ones were in India. My wife and I were there 4 years ago, north of Delhi. That's our Interact Club. That picture in the bottom is an Interact Club. They were out advertising, going through some very rural areas, promoting the vaccine campaign. The kids are holding up their pinky finger, and you may have heard, and some Interact clubs do this as a fundraiser, a Purple Pinky Day. And one thing you could think about, people pay $1 and they get their pinky marked, like for polio. When the kids are vaccinated, an indelible mark is put on their finger that is hard to wash off. And that means that so they don't get revaccinated. They don't have cards. They don't have computerization. We don't have the technology we use here. So these kids do it. The cat mask, it has a little rotary wheel on it. The kids who were given a little rubber ball and a paper mask after they were vaccinated as a gift. They used to give them whistles, but the vaccinators asked to stop. 100 kids with whistles under 5 is not a good thing to have. So they stopped giving them whistles. The other picture there is they're doing house to house. After the vaccinations are done for several days at a clinic, these are pop-up clinics, then they go house to house looking for children, looking for that mark, looking for children without that mark. And that's what's going on there. They're going into homes, looking, and many times they have to be women. The men can't go into the homes, but the female vaccinators can go in the homes and vaccinate the children. That's me vaccinating that baby there. The woman brought the baby out. That baby is 12 hours old. It was born in that house 12 hours the night before we got there. I had no idea what to do with a 12-hour-old baby. This woman wanted to give him to be vaccinated. The healthcare worker actually said the vaccine probably won't do any good. The baby's too young, but it won't hurt them. And the chances of them, because they're migrant workers, of getting vaccinated again is very small. Vaccinate the kid anyhow. But it was quite emotional to have a mother, different language, different culture, different everything, pass me and trust me with her baby. It was sort of like, ooh, this is pretty emotional. And another one at the campaign, vaccinating the children. They're drops, they're not injections. It's an oral polio vaccine. All of you, I suspect, got an injectable. Part of the pediatric program in Canada, every child, 90%, there's about 10% of children aren't vaccinated because their parents are resistant. But all of you, if you receive pediatric, you got an injectable polio vaccine. In these countries, oral is done. It's cheaper and far easier to use. What can you do? Here comes the commercial message. Learn about polio, what we're doing today. Do some research. If you've got the ability in your school year to write an essay or interview somebody like Gabby, or whatever classes, whether it's a science class or a literature class or a history class, think about doing a project on polio as part of your essay or a presentation if you have that flexibility. Connect with the community, tell people what you're doing, and raise money, donate. So the Pumpkins for Polio campaign. This will be the third year Ladner Rotary is done it. We raise a little bit of money, but more importantly, we raise awareness in the community. Think about what you could do in the school, the Purple Pinky Day. Maybe how about a pumpkin carving contest in the school where people pay $5 to enter a carved pumpkin, and then you have prizes. Maybe some of the businesses, the restaurants, the pizza places in Ladner the Ladner Rotary Good Club would be pleased to help work with you to raise some gifts. So 100% of the money you raise goes to polio eradication. But a carving contest, you can do other things with pumpkins other than sell them. Be creative. Who can maybe the biggest pumpkin? Who can grow the biggest pumpkin? What student of Delta Secondary can raise the biggest pumpkin? I don't know what you can do. Who can throw the pumpkin the farthest across the field? I don't know. Have what do you call it? A shot put pumpkin tossing contest. I don't know. But be creative with what you could do. A date to remember annually, Rotary celebrates in the United Nations. World Polio Day is October 24th. I don't know what day it is, the week it is in 2022, 21, excuse me, 2021. But that's a date you could think about doing something in the school or kicking off the pumpkin campaign on World Polio Day. But it gives you a date to work towards in the school. And we're to help you. Just remember, excuse me, why we do this. Now it's children under 5 in the world that are the most vulnerable. These are the kids that get polio. That's why we do this. It's for them. So we'll end it there, and Gabby and I'll try to answer any questions you've got.
Super. Thank you, Chris. That was an excellent presentation.
Questions, comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to both of you guys. It was a really informative presentation. I do actually have a couple of questions. So the first one is the polio eradication initiative. When it started, who did it start with, and how has it grown and up till now?
Well, it started in the Philippines. Technically, it goes back to the 1930s in the sense of Rotary worked with the March of Dimes. When you may not be aware that President Roosevelt in the was a polio survivor. He was in a wheelchair, longest serving U.S. president, and he was instrumental in starting the March of Dimes. And Rotary worked on that and had done some rehabilitation work with polio survivors over the years, and particularly children. In about 1979, Rotarians in the Philippines looked around. There had been an effective polio vaccine. In Canada, I got a polio vaccine as a child. Polio was wiped out of Canada, wiped out of the United States very quickly with the vaccine. It's a very effective vaccine. But in some countries it wasn't. And the Philippines was one of those. And the Rotarians looked around, said, this is wrong. Our children, so they went out and started buying vaccine. The Rotary Foundation, our charitable part of Rotary, gave them at that time, a very large grant, about $100,000 to buy vaccine. And it worked. The Philippines very quickly eradicated polio. And Rotary looked around very naively in the early 80s and said, we could do that around the world. We'll eradicate polio around the world. And we started doing this. We started raising millions of dollars, and suddenly the World Health Organization and the US Centers for Disease Control, UNICEF, looked around and said, oh, maybe that's possible. Can we join you? And they came in, and then in the 2019, about around 2000, the Bill and Melinda Gates charity from Seattle joined in, and right now Bill and Melinda Gates give Rotary $100 million US a year. If we raise 50 million, if Rotary raises 50 million US dollars, Gates will match it with 100 million, and we've got that every year. So that's how it sort of started globally. And the vaccine is so effective. If you can get it into the children, it works. It really does work. So, but it's taken Rotary 35, 40 years to get to the point where we can actually see the last case of polio in Afghanistan or Pakistan.
Yeah. There's also sort of the measurement they have is for the wild polio virus, which is the actual virus itself. There are numbers of vaccine-derived cases as well, which are higher than the two that have been mentioned. But that's something, you know, any vaccine is going to have that effect. There's going to be a very, very minor percentage of people that will get polio from the vaccine. It seems to be an unavoidable situation, but the numbers they're focusing on is the actual wild virus.
Yep. Yeah. Another question?
I have another one here. For both of you, what have been your favorite like projects you've done or the events you've been involved with? If you have
Well,
to pick
for me, my biggest project was and it's still going, is our project in Ethiopia at the rehabilitation hospital in Menegesha, where we are actually training the mothers of the children that have polio that are at the hospital. The mothers are brought in and given training in physiotherapy and so on. So we've hired a couple of physiotherapists over several years to do that training and also to work with the children with polio, because there in fact still are children that have had polio ever since 1988 and even later on. So there have been many polio cases. So these children are all still there and they need care and they need physiotherapy and so on and so forth. So I'm very gratified with that project. And it's another aspect of Rotary is the global grant system, which we can actually devise a project, whether it's polio or a number of other things. And any Rotarian can actually apply and see some of their ideas brought to fruition in a global sense. So, that's one of the great things about Rotary. I think you'd agree with that, Chris, as well.
Yep.
The Rotary Foundation.
And for me, I guess finally giving the vaccine and a national immunization day, those pictures in India, sort of working on polio for 20 years, raising money, talking about it in an abstract sense. And then actually holding a child or a mother passing me a child and giving them drops and knowing that kid will run and play and won't get polio is sort of, we don't do often, we raise money for a charity and we never see the recipient. It's rare that when you go out and do a cancer walk, you do the walk for Alzheimer's. You may know a family member that has Alzheimer's. You may know a family member that has cancer, but rarely do you see the direct recipient of the cancer research or the work from the Alzheimer's Society. So actually raise money for polio and then see the child, hold the child, be the person that gives them the vaccine was sort of, that's pretty special.
Yeah, that's definitely something fascinating, being able to see like the direct, like the recipient, as you said, like seeing exactly where those funds you raise and how it affects people. I think that's something that's really unique and something that Rotary gives Interact like an opportunity to be a part of. So yeah, thank you guys for that presentation. Thanks for speaking with our members. I'll stay in touch with you, Chris, for the recording, just so I can send it
Yep.
to those members that wanted to attend today, but they couldn't.
Yep.
And other than that, if anyone has any last minute comments, questions.
Thank you very much. Ashwarya, is that how you pronounce your name? Yeah.
Yeah, you said it right.
Did I? I can't believe it. I wanted to let you know that I went to Queen Elizabeth High School, and we were always rivals of Delta High School, you know, back in many years ago. So,
Where is that high school?
hey,
Where is the Queen Elizabeth?
Queen Elizabeth is on King George Highway in Surrey.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think we used to play basketball or something with you folks. But that was a long time ago, in fact. Anyway, super. Thanks
Okay.
for having us.
Thanks and good luck, and just stay in touch. Bridget is a good link to the Rotary Club as well. You know, if you ask for something, the worst thing we can do is say no, and more likely the answer is going to be yes. If there's something you don't know or something you want to try or do, let us know, and we'll figure out how to make it happen. And good luck with school, and hopefully in September the world won't be normal, but whatever the new normal is, whatever that means, I'm not sure. We're all looking forward to seeing what the new normal is, but hopefully in September your classes in school is a little bit back to what it is. And if you're not vaccinated against COVID yet, you better get out there. You're all eligible, so
Yeah,
go out and get your COVID shot.
I got my shot yesterday.
Good. I've had two of them. I've had both my COVID shots, so I've got the immunity, and I've got shingles shots. People of my age that had chicken pox as a kid, so I've had shingle shots. I've had pneumonia shots, and going to Africa, they shot things into my arms. I couldn't even pronounce
Yeah,
what they
yeah.
were.
We had to get the yellow fever shot too when we
Yeah.
went to Africa, Ethiopia. Yeah, that was.
And cholera stuff. You drink for cholera. No. We don't know how lucky we are in Canada.
We can go anywhere, Chris, and we'll be safe. No matter what we do, we can go, you know, we can go to the moon and we wouldn't get sick, right?
Anyhow, guys, thanks very much. Stay in touch.
Thank
Bye
you,
now.
everybody. Bye for now. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.